What excuses are they?
So Val's stuck in bad weather. So he put something very risky, such as a flight, before something very important, such as this podcast, and underestimated the tail of that event, and got himself stuck.
Yeah, and I think we can't. We're not there yet. I don't think we can generate his AI just yet. And I think Greg's learning some important life skills that are not to do with
Oh yeah,
any AI at this stage.
yeah.
So we'll leave him be where he is. He's in a safe space. So I
Actually,
thought,
congratulations.
yeah, absolutely, huge milestone. If we want to talk project speak, but why don't we, I guess, tell the listeners what this show is all about and why I think we decided to do this. I think there's a lot of myths about AI. I think there's a lot of confusion. I think there's a lot to be discussed still as well. And I don't think we'll have all of the answers necessarily, but I think at least by sharing our views, challenging each other with various points, we can at least give perspective on what is happening. I mean, certainly from my perspective, I'm still very much learning. You're the master, so to speak. If it's just the two of us on this episode, but I'm certainly looking to be educated and schooled, and I think a lot of the listeners will probably looking forward to the same. Alan, you sit there with a smirk on your face.
I'm saying because you know a lot more than you let on. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Maybe, but the jury's still out. I think we're our own worst critics. But anyway, so we're going to hopefully give you everything, give you things to think about, things to consider, and perhaps just some perspective on what is happening, because there is a lot happening and is evolving as we speak. We'll hopefully try and cover some of the hot topics. I mean, just recently we saw, the whole palaver with OpenAI and their board and Sam Altman and the works, and we can have views and comments on those things as well and where it's all going. Val just posted recently, I think just today, about AI, ChatGPT is just generating bullshit, and we can be a bit provocative like that as well. But before we get there, I think we like to, I guess, set baselines. What do we actually mean when we talk about generative AI? Is there a definition, Alan?
I think everybody's got their own. And if you buy different books or look at Wikipedia, you're gonna get different definitions for what generative AI is. But typically, the way we would think about generative AI is effectively machine learning that does something that is different from typical machine learning. And the generative part is because it's generating new information. So from an information theory perspective, which is a little bit like this weird discipline, but all of machine learning is reducing information, right? So even if you're forecasting the future, you have a lot of information and you're reducing it down. If you're classifying all these kinds of things, versus generative is going from low information to high information. So that's why it's called generative, because it's generating new stuff that didn't exist. And, in a sense, by definition, making it all up.
Well, I was just about to ask you, how do we know if the stuff it's making up is accurate? How do we know? Let's take the article. I don't know if you've seen it yet. You probably haven't had a chance because you're battling to get onto our recording application, which we won't name. But is it all shit in, shit out when it comes to generative AI?
No, I don't think so, right? Like, I mean, by definition, the models are coming up with stuff. That's what they're designed to do, right? So in a sense, everything is a hallucination, but some hallucinations are better than others, in the sense that when they're correct, they're extremely better. And there are a lot of examples. Like, if you just think about it, we just look at like the examples that people are posting online, there will be people posting like 3-word prompts, and then the model goes and creates a whole set of things based on those 3 words, right? And I find that incredibly fascinating that it just doesn't tell you to go and do one, to be honest. Because if you said that to a human, they're like, "What do you mean?" Right? So, and this is partly by design, partly by heavy supervision and heavy system prompting. But it's interesting that it can extract some information and then build a lot on top of anything you give it. Right? This is true of large language models, and maybe not so much about other types of models.
Okay, what other types of models are there? Because LLMs are probably the ones that most people are familiar with, or at least the name large language models. What else is there?
So, well, you have, by what the name implies, you also have normal language models, and those are doing different things. So, a language model, when transformers were born, and they were a lot smaller than your chat GPTs or than llamas and all of that, you'd be looking at models to do embedding and to do text representation kind of stuff, right? So, and without getting too boring and too much into the detail, but it's the same architecture, just the large language models are bigger. But actually, because the models are smaller, they can't fit a whole set of notions and information. So what they usually used to do is to encode, right? So basically, the way transformers are trained, you have like two halves. You have an encoder and a decoder, which is trying to not go too much into the detail, but the encoder creates some representation of text internal. So it's like very weird set of sequences of numbers. And then the decoder goes from an internal representation to text, and that's the generative part. Whereas the bit before is what we use for embeddings, for example. And it has its own uses. And then you've got all of traditional machine learning with neural nets, with MLPs, convolutional neural nets, graph neural networks, all that kind of stuff, which does nothing on text, right? Generative AI, like we talk a lot about LLMs. There's a lot of other things in generative AI, right? So you've got stable diffusion for generating images. I know that some of our friends really love Midjourney, so
Yeah. There's Midjourney, there's Dolly. I've never used Midjourney myself, I don't think, but it is pretty cool with what it can come up. But there's this whole piece. If you think about, let's just take generating images, right? There's a whole piece on, I guess, creativity. That is, we used to say before, I think, is that computers could do a lot, but they can't, they're not creative. But actually, we're seeing that they are, I think. Is it truly creative, though? The argument could go both ways to say, actually, yes, it is, because to your, I think, early definition, it's taking a whole bunch of stuff and making something up, and isn't that being creative?
I don't know. I think there's a few school of thoughts on this, right? Mine is that I'm just naturally a little bit cynical. Is anything truly creative?
Yeah, this
Are
is true.
humans truly creative, right? Like, or is it mostly 99.999% derivative, right? Even ideation, right? And like I actually use the example, like, I don't know if it's a true story, right? We've got this apocryphal story of Newton sitting under the tree and getting hit by an apple. If he didn't get hit by an apple, he wouldn't have thought about gravity, right?
Yep.
So that is not necessarily bad, actually, not at all, right? Because it led to a lot of discoveries, but it was seeded by something else, and that is kind of always true, which is also true with Midjourney, right? Like, or DALL-E, right? You give it a prompt, right? So it's your idea. In the same way that, if I hire a painter and tell them what I would put in a prompt, right, and say, I want a picture of Val stuck in an airport in an impressionist style, they'll go and do it, and you'll kind of get what you expect, right? Is that being creative? Not necessarily, right? They're just being skilled with a brush, which is obviously a very important skill, but they're putting a lot less of their own in there. And I think that's what this is, right? And in a sense, well, without in a sense, you are still responsible for coming up with the idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You're right, but also if you think about everything else we do, not just, I guess, with paintings and drawings, right? We learn from those that have been before us. We go to schools, we go to universities. If we don't go to schools and universities, our parents are teaching us something. If the communities we grow up, friends and family, we're learning off of them all the time. And in a sense, as you say, we're taking stuff as human beings and collecting large large bits of information and making things up as well. And I
Yeah.
was chatting with someone the other day, and we were saying, I guess they challenged, and with me being challenging back, they challenged the notion of, I guess, AI, and in terms of, that it's just making things up. And there's also this school of thought, I guess, of the wisdom of the crowds, and how wisdom of the crowd is always correct. But actually, isn't that just what it's doing? It's taking the crowd, as if you will, and saying, actually, what is the majority of people saying, and where should this be, and coming with an outcome. I guess maybe this is the other point of contention. It depends also how things were coded, and maybe we can get into that, because I think when we spoke on another podcast, Alan, we spoke about the architect, and if they had bad intentions writing in bad code to give bad outcomes. And maybe this is also a route into discussing a bit of, there's also contention over who governs what's happening. And there was an interesting post I think you commented on the other day, where folks should get used to, or if you want to get into governing how AI is, I guess, used and put into the market, it's not with governments actually. Is that probably worth touching on? Because I think a lot of people are confused with that point as well. Is how safe is it? What safeguards should we be putting on it? Where do you sit with that?
I think right now we're completely safe. There's no real danger to humanity right now. Which isn't really saying be complacent in any way. There's it depends on what view you take, but there's a couple of options of how you can see the future, right? You can see the future as this utopic, I don't know if you've seen the meme, but the future if X happened, where it's all like flying cars and wonderful buildings and everything's green.
Hoverboards. I want a hoverboard.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Where I think the right investment in AI and the right investment in regulation will really help. But you can also have the opposite view, right? Which is that AI could be used as something evil, right? And I don't believe the dystopian third option, which is AI takes off and becomes evil and itself. Mostly because why would it care? Like, if you have all of a sudden a super intelligence that isn't attached to a meat bag, then it can travel anywhere at any speed. Why does it even care about staying on this planet? Right? It just like throw itself onto a rocket with some solar panels, be in space, and exist forever.
Yeah, this is true. This is
true. And all forms of intelligence have in common so far self-preservation, right? So really, the trick is don't threaten it, right? And then it will just leave and do its own thing, right? But even if you do, it's like, we're really just a disturbance in its eyes, right? It's kind of like, why would there be an incentive to be evil and want to destroy humanity?
Yeah. Yeah. It needs a reason, I guess.
There needs to be a reason, right? Like even the most evil people in the world had rational reasons for doing what they did, or rational explanations. Like, I'm not justifying or defending or saying that they were rational to me. Right? They thought they were rational. Like, maybe.
Well, but by that very argument, could AI have a rational argument to destroy humans? Are we down this rabbit hole? Should we?
Maybe we are. Maybe we are. Sorry. It's
We're gonna
not.
have
Yeah.
fun. We can go, folks. We can go all over
It's
the show,
not.
so just bear with us and send us questions. By the way, if you're on YouTube and you're watching us live, send questions in. Because we want this to be interactive, because we don't know what we're going to say and where we're going to go with this. So we've just gone to apocalyptic ideas on AI, but maybe we should bring it up a level.
Well,
And
yeah,
because
you can tell I read a lot of sci-fi, right?
which is great. That's, people get their creativity from various places. But one thing I do recognize is we'll probably have quite a few project professionals, because that's the industry we're in. And if we bring all of this, we've just discussed generative AI, what it all means, where it could go. What does it actually mean for projects and project delivery in general? How do we see this? I've asked this to you before. I've been asked this myself, will it replace jobs, yada, yada, all these questions. And I think the jury truly is still out, because we don't truly know. But yeah, what are your thoughts on where the impact of generative AI and how it helps or hinders project delivery?
Well, I think it'll be hard to say that it would hinder project delivery, right? Mostly because anyone developing AI for project delivery should be incentivized to improve project delivery, right?
Yep.
Now, we might get into a side discussion as to whether those incentives that exist today are the correct ones, but I also choose to believe that even if we don't have the correct ones today, we're going to be constantly nudged towards finding the correct ones. So that one's easy. That's the easy bit. The hard bit is, will it replace jobs? And I think really inevitably, yes. Right now, I think the safest jobs in project delivery, but also in all other disciplines, are blue collar jobs, right? And I think we've all figured that one out. Because robots are way further behind. And how do we then decompose that into which jobs, how, what impact is it going to have? That's the hard part, right? There's I used this on another podcast, but there's basically this thought of, what would you do if you had 1,000 interns? Kind of thought, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is what most AI is going to move towards, at least in the next 5 to 10 years. If you had all of a sudden 1,000 interns to help you do your job, I think that has to mean something for first of all, interns and internships in general. How are those going to change? And entry level positions, right?
Yeah, and I think sorry to jump in there, I think you raised a important point there, and I think we should make a distinction on this. I think you're right. Technology, let's call it, will replace jobs, but my personal view is it won't replace people, the need for people on projects.
No, they'll just move somewhere else.
Yeah. And I think that's important, because I think people equate jobs to people in their minds when we say it will replace jobs. But I do think it'll evolve and change the roles, as you say, the types of jobs required to deliver projects, and that requires a different skill set. And so that where that leads me is that if you're not upskilling, guess what? You might lose your job. Um, and I think that's for me the key there is what are you doing to upskilling yourself in this space, because there will be an impact. But sorry,
Yeah.
I jumped in. Do you want to carry on with your flow there?
No,
It's
no,
a
no.
good
You're
point.
absolutely right. Like,
Yeah.
you got me thinking a little bit about this. Is maybe completely a bit of a jump about the Actors Guild, and I was completely taken aback by the whole strike. Right. Mostly because if I was given the opportunity, which is not on the table at this point, I think, but it might be in the future. But if I was given the opportunity to just train a model with my image, I don't even have to be a good actor, and then sit there and collect rent on my image for the rest of my life. I mean, where do I sign, right?
Yeah.
And then I can spend the rest of my time gardening or something. Obviously, it's a little bit more complex than that, and they probably had very good reasons to go on strike. But that's one part of thinking about it. Like maybe we all just work less. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Spend more time with our families, spend more time going to Alton Towers or whatever it is that people do.
Yeah. Sign me up.
And the other one is the it's going to sound a little bit despondent, right? But if you think about lifts as in elevators for the American audience, in New York specifically because there's something interesting that happened, right? But every lift used to have an operator in the early days.
Yeah.
Right, there'd be some person who like knew how to maneuver the lift, and they would stop it at the right place, and you tell them where you're going. That got completely replaced by the lift button, and we all think it's normal to go into a lift and press a button, and there's nobody there waiting for you, asking you where you want to go. On one side, you lost that little bit of conversation, which I mean, I never experienced it because it was long before I was born, of like, how was your day kind of thing. But really that freed up that person to do something that maybe was, the next step up, right? And so a lot of them moved into just managing the building in a sense, right? They were like the first version of some sort of concierge of the building, right?
Yeah. Have you heard the washing machine one as well?
I have not heard the washing machine one.
Where before the washing machine, right? And obviously we were in different times, but predominantly women used to gather around rivers, dams, etc., and wash clothes. And
Yeah.
they used to chat about the kids, about the family, and that was actually social dynamics and the way news was spread and how people kept in contact, and that's how communities were formed. And there was a lot more going on than just the actual washing of clothes. It became the fabric of society, or it was the fabric of society. But then the washing machine came along, and now you lost some of that. And so I think importantly, you point out you do lose an element when you look to replace something. But then it's important for us to be cognizant of what we're losing and then find other ways to replace that.
Yeah.
But I think it's only when we stop to think about it that we actually really truly think about it and appreciate what we lose. Because we always think of gain, 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 but there's always a cost to everything, right?
Yeah. And if you've replaced, washing your clothes in the courtyard with the washing machine, you should replace that social dynamic with like going to the pub or going to the bar or like meeting your friends some other way.
Yeah.
In a way that's like probably also more enjoyable than sitting there bent over a bunch of dirty laundry.
Probably. But hey, look, we do actually have amazingly some questions coming in on our first episode. How cool is that?
Nice. So there is someone listening.
There is someone listening. There's at least two people, which is
Nice.
awesome. So let's go through them. So Richard Logue, thanks for putting your one in. So he says, guys, how far are we from AI driving project planning? Wow, okay. So I think you start with this because again, on another podcast we discussed this and you shared something you were playing with. and you've got, I don't know if you've got a prototype, you put it out there for people to look at. How far
Yeah,
are
I
we?
did. I did this thing in January last year, right? Didn't I? Where I was like, hey, look, we can break down a WBS into activities. We can suggest what the next activities in a sequence should be. And it was mostly like, well, it was two things. One, it was we just got curious, so we tried it out. And the second was it's a test. If anybody's interested, we can continue developing it. We got one email, I think, after that event. So, in a sense, maybe it's not even that interesting. I think we have to split the notion of project planning into two parts, right? One is writing a schedule, which I think you could build it. Like we got that like very small example in me doing some work over Christmas, right? With some transformers. But so you can imagine that you go forward with that work and you can actually probably get to the point where eventually you will just upload a business case and a scope document and out comes a schedule. And then all the planner has to do, or the scheduler in that has to do in that case, is review the schedule, change it to match what they want, or maybe give a second prompt saying, I don't like this, make it different, right? Which is, again, what you would do if you had 1,000 planning interns, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone would necessarily feel upset about that because they still have control of the content that gets produced, right? If you're thinking about planning as this is what we do when we do it, but not as from the schedule perspective, but as the actual scope of work and deciding how you're going to do the work, there I would want someone responsible, right? And this is why, for example, self-driving cars have been slow in adoption, even though the accident rates are, thousands of times lower than if humans drive, is not, is it going to be better or more accurate? It's who takes responsibility for when it goes wrong, right? So if you think about, planning a project from a decision perspective of this is what we're doing and this is how we're going to do it. If you get that wrong, someone needs to take the responsibility of we built the wrong thing or we built it in the wrong way, so we're going to have to tear it down and redo it. Which I'm not even going to touch that, right?
Well, yeah, you bring up important points because we do like to, hold people specifically on projects accountable. When there's accountability, there's actually action, whether that's right action or wrong action, we can debate. But if you feel you're accountable for something on a project, you do your best to deliver it to your best.
Yeah.
On the self-driving car thing, an interesting anecdote as well was I was speaking about 5 years ago to a former Cathay Pacific airline pilot who now was still trains pilots, and I asked him, at that time we had drones and things like that, flying drones. Why do we still have pilots? And can't planes do everything themselves? And he said, yeah, they can. They can take off themselves, they can fly themselves, and they can land themselves. But the biggest reason you still have pilots is because generally most people won't get on a plane if there's no pilot on the plane. Who's taking responsibility, right? Who's in control? It's I think it's a human behavior that we want to know who's at the helm, who's directing things. And I think if we feel that we're being controlled by something that's not human, it just doesn't feel right, perhaps.
Yeah.
So bring it back to the project planning one, and then we'll move on to the next one. I just to add my 2 cents. I think, I think AI driving project planning is an interesting thought. What do we mean by driving project planning? Well, there could be various answers to that. For me, what that could mean is, as you say, Ellen, I think, is it'll just get us to maybe the top 5 or 10 optimal scenarios on which a project could be delivered in sequence of tasks and events, but it'll still, for me, need some sort of human intervention to say, is that how we want to deliver it based on a number of other factors? So that would be, and maybe as we go into each episode every week, the answer will change based on technology. But I think as it stands, that's where I am today with it. But let's move on. So there's actually two questions, but we'll ask it in two parts. So Adam R asks, how do you think we can use AI now to better manage or define project delivery risks prior to construction or during the planning stage to streamline and optimize programs? So there's a lot in that one. So it's for a program view as about streamlining and optimizing based on identifying risks prior to actually putting anything in the ground.
Dale, I think for correctness, maybe you should answer that so I don't do a sales pitch.
Yeah, look, I think there are very many ways. You know, there's technology out there. I mean, let's make, you know, no bones about it. You know, you have a software company. Greg, who's on this podcast, has a software company. You know, it takes data. It looks at, you know, various points at which you could identify risks. I think, you know, I think the first thing is probably worth understanding what is out there, what is available with the technology, and what that actually means. The how, I think that's where you could come in, Alan, and talk about how it actually gets you there. Um, but I think it's taking a leap of faith, you know, with the tech that is out there. That's my honest view. That's not a sales pitch. There's someone that's agnostic, that's just really curious, is to say, okay, you have the end plans, you have the nodes and links in the industry, in the market. Why don't we just test it and see, does it work or
They
not,
all
right?
start with N, by the way.
They all start with N. There are others as well. This isn't a nodes and links and end plan sales podcast by any means, but there's other tech firms out there. Just test it, just be curious and go, actually, we do have a lot of tech at our disposal. Maybe even ChatGPT, maybe someone that's built a ChatGPT risk GPT, you know, and put it out there for everyone to consume. Maybe that helps you. But I think for me, it's being curious in the first instance and going, what is available before we actually necessarily take the leap of faith? Because I think there is apprehension in the industry to use tech, and the only way to break down that barrier is to be curious. So yeah, hopefully I haven't tried to do a sales pitch there, because this generally isn't about sales, but add to it, Alan. Come on, we know
Yeah,
you want to add to
I've
it.
got actually you got me thinking about something. So, and this is true about, I think, all of the different products anyway. But sorry, all of the different products anyway, and it's what you said about thinking about possible different scenarios, right? So like you look at you know, step one, you look at what's available, what's out there. Step two has to be, how does this change my workflow, right? Because if it doesn't change your workflow, only one of two things is possibly true. It's replacing you entirely in the workflow, right? And so in a sense, it changes the workflow by you're not being involved in it anymore, which I don't think is going to be the case for almost anything. Or you're missing a step and you're not going to get value out of it, right? And this is true of all technological changes, right? Not just AI. They're all the same from that perspective. So the way I see it is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to bang on about the MDU again. There's this discipline. So for anyone who hasn't heard me talk about the MDU, you've got this this group of, I want to say 100, 200 people. It's an academic group that came out of the Rand Corporation back in the 90s, I want to say. It's called Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty, which is all about thinking about how do you make decisions when you have no idea what's going to happen, right? So like you don't even have a forecastable model, which is generally not the situation we're in most cases, because at the very least we know what our intentions are and what we want to build, so we can come up with some ideas. And from there, so I've taken it a little bit as a philosophy. So if that's the extreme case, the mild case is we have some forecast. We don't know how good it's actually going to be. It's probably okay. It tells us a couple of things, both at the call it like pre-FID kind of stage, when you have a business case and you're designing something, so pre-construction, where you actually still have a lot of options to change things, as well as during construction when you already have a schedule and you're mostly talking about, in one sense, optimization, but also prevention. I think the behavior that this leads to is the same in both cases, which is come up with as many options as you can, right? What would you do if you had, well, maybe in this case, 1 million interns, so that you can generate all of the different possible ways that the future can unfold in front of you, and then you look at the steps that lead you to the best one, right? So you Loki's multiverse tree, or the Rehoboam in Westworld kind of scenario, where you're like, oh, things could go in like so many different ways. I'm going to look at this strand in the multiverse and pick the one that I like, and then reverse back from that endpoint to where I am and look at what the pathway of decisions is, and whether it's plausible, possible, and affordable, and all those things, right? And I think that's how it's going to change. I think there will be an element of automating all of the work underneath it, of like call it all the analysis, but in a sense also searching, right? If you're exploring 50,000 options rather than 5, at that point you need to automate the search as well, and then you find the best ones, right? So that's where I think it's going to go, maybe in like the next 5-10 years.
And just quickly, for those that don't know, MDU, what does that stand for?
DMDU, decision making under deep uncertainty.
DMDU.
Yeah. There's a
DMDU.
book, it's mostly case studies on water management, because water management really has this problem. They don't know what the water demand is going to be. They don't know what, climate change is going to be like. They're not going to know what the water supply is, but they need to decide what their plan is for 70, 50, 70, 100 years ahead in terms of building water infrastructure. And city planning is kind of similar.
Yeah. No, interesting points. And I do like Adam's question, specifically from a risk angle, because, and hopefully you'll agree with me, Alan, or you don't have to agree actually, but I think all we actually really do, if you wanted to boil it down on projects, is we just manage risks, because we know what we need to do and we know how we want to do it, or generally we know how we want to do it. We have a plan that we want to follow, and we manage risks so that we can stick to that plan and stick to that budget. And so the follow-on question is, do you think AI will do a better job at risk management, as it will have or should have no conscious or unconscious bias to risk management? Which is interesting, because going back to our previous conversation, I think it can have a bias based on the person or people that have coded it and how they've coded the AI. I don't know. That's my view, but you go on.
So we have, I think our commercial team has a long set of slides on this topic, and we have a very strong belief on that. I'm going to try and be more generic than that, though, which is to say that yes, what you're saying is right, Dale. If you think about like all possible types of AI, what you put in, right, and especially if we're thinking about LLMs, then what you get depends on what's in the prompt. In terms of like more there's also other things that you can do with more traditional ML, and actually in many cases that might work better because you don't have hallucinations in those cases, right? And you only have statistical error. So, and in those cases, it all only depends on what goes into the training set. Okay, so what do you put in the training set, and the general golden rule is the more you put in, the better. So this is really cool not treaty. It's like it's not an article. It's like a brain dump, I think, is probably the best way to call it. I will find the name of it. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on it. I'll find it. I'll find it in a second. But it's talking about the fact that rational design will always be trumped by compute power and data. So we've seen this in a lot of different places where early versions of a system, think Deep Blue playing chess, right, was a rationally designed thing that was doing a search on a space and it had an algorithm. And then AlphaZero is literally just dump data into a larger model, right? And it actually creates its own data because it's doing reinforcement learning. So it just plays against itself until it's unbeatable. So that pattern has repeated itself so much that I think really just chuck as much as you can in. And if you have a sufficiently large model, it will know which bits are relevant to you anyway. And that is actually incredibly powerful. And, like that's basically the story behind large language models, right? They picked models that are hundreds of billions of weights, hundreds of billions of parameters in a model, and then showed them the entire internet.
Yeah, that's true. And I think you're right. And as you were chatting, I was thinking the same thing, that I think the only way to really truly know if it will do a better job at risk management is actually to, I guess, in simple terms, do the A/B test and look at both and actually have those multiple points of take a whole bunch of humans' views on risks and take AI and the answers from the tools that you have at your disposal and see where we go. I don't think we know today, but I think that it should be. I agree that in theory it should be, but if we want I guess, the exam question answered, it's tested out for yourself because you need to be convinced that it works as a project professional, is my view on it.
Yeah.
But look, we have actually gone over time. So do you want to have a final word on that before we close off?
Yeah, just one final word. I think so. The piece is called "The Bitter Lesson" by Rich Sutton, and it's very short. It's like a couple of paragraphs, but it's incredibly thoughtful. And second, I think actually there's places where knowing the biases is going to be good. So if you think about the data in projects, the biases are going to be just how we do stuff and how we do stuff wrong in some cases. So knowing how to predict those biases is actually like one of the major USPs of this. And so as long as it's not, nefarious biases that have come out from other things, then actually in some cases it can be good.
Awesome. And I think that's a great cliffhanger to finish off episode 1 on. Wow, what an awesome first episode. We promise we'll try and get the other 2 on going forward. But folks, I think we've just started. Well, we literally just have started the conversation. We're here every week, same time. Hopefully, we might adjust it depending on where Alan is all over the world and Greg and Val are, because they're jet setters. But thank you for joining us. It's been awesome just to, I guess, share our views, but also interact with those questions coming in. Hopefully, we'll have more questions coming in the future episodes. We might have a surprise or 2 for you in the future as well. So watch out for that space. We want to get more people involved. And again, this is all about just sharing information, insight, and knowledge forward. So thank you all. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Can I invite people to our event next week?
Of course you can. Go for it quickly.
We've got an event on the 6th of December, AI Day. We're just going to show actually some of the things that we spoke about today, but I don't want to give away too much.
Awesome. Cool. All right, folks, reach out to Alan for more details on that, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye for now.